Marcus Chen stood in the pre-dawn darkness, watching the garbage truck rumble past his apartment complex on Maple Street. At 38 years old, with a 10-year-old daughter named Sophie, and exactly $243 in his bank account, he'd learned that one person's trash was quite literally another person's survival strategy. The morning air was crisp and cold, carrying the acrid smell of decay and possibility in equal measure. He pulled on his worn work gloves, the leather cracked and faded from countless hours of sorting, cleaning, and rebuilding, and wheeled his rusty shopping cart toward the commercial district where the real treasure awaited. His daughter was still asleep in their cramped two-bedroom apartment, dreaming whatever dreams a child of her age could conjure, unaware that her father had just finished his third shift at the warehouse and was now beginning his second job before the sun would even think about rising. 3 years ago, everything had collapsed. His wife Sarah had left, taking with her the modest savings they'd accumulated and leaving behind a custody arrangement that made Marcus both mother and father to Sophie. His corporate job in supply chain management had evaporated when the company went under, taking his severance package with it. The bills piled up like snow in a harsh winter, each one more aggressive than the last. The eviction notice on his refrigerator had become a constant reminder of his failure. At least that's what he told himself in the quiet moments when Sophie was sleeping, and he could let the despair wash over him completely. He'd tried everything: freelance consulting, retail work, even driving for rideshare services, but nothing had provided enough money to catch up on rent, utilities, food, and Sophie's orthodontist fees that her mother's new husband had refused to cover despite the custody agreement. Then, 6 months into his darkest period, Marcus had noticed something. While jogging through the wealthy neighborhood where executives' estates sprawled behind manicured gates, he'd seen them, perfectly good items sitting in the trash bins and recycling centers. An antique wooden chair with a loose leg, copper pipes from a renovation project, industrial-grade stainless steel shelving units, premium circuit boards from discarded computers, brass fixtures, and leather-bound books worth money to collectors. That night, after dropping Sophie at school, he'd taken his shopping cart and begun collecting. Not because he believed it would change his life, but because he needed to do something, anything, besides sit in his apartment and contemplate his failures. The first month, he made $45. The second month, $87. By the third month, after learning the value of different materials and where to sell them, he'd accumulated $322. It wasn't a fortune, but it was a start. He'd created a small website using free templates, took photographs of his cleaned-up finds, and posted them on every resale platform he could find. Buyers trickled in slowly. A woman in a historic home restoration business bought old door hardware. A furniture maker purchased his salvaged wood. Electronics recyclers bought his carefully sorted components. Slowly, methodically, Marcus Chen had built a business from garbage, working before dawn and after dusk, late into the night on his laptop computer that was itself a salvaged machine he'd rebuilt from parts found in dumpsters. Sophie had noticed the change around month 4. She'd come home from school to find her father in their kitchen, genuinely smiling, counting cash that had come from his online sales. "Dad, where did all this money come from?" she'd asked with the innocent curiosity of a child who'd seen her family's life fall apart and wanted to understand how it might be pieced back together. He'd shown her his current inventory: a beautiful Victorian-era coat rack, some premium copper guttering material, a collection of vintage cameras he'd carefully restored, and explained that he was building something. He didn't call it a business. He called it our second chance. And Sophie had believed him because she had faith that her father, despite everything, was one of the good ones. What Marcus hadn't anticipated was how his project would evolve beyond simple reselling. He'd started noticing patterns in what people wanted and what was being discarded. Builders and contractors would throw away perfectly usable materials. Electronics manufacturers would dispose of high-grade components. Furniture companies would discard wood that could be reclaimed. Interior designers would waste materials that had value in other markets. He began to see the waste stream as information. He started researching where the best materials came from, which sources were most reliable, and what buyers were willing to pay premium prices for. He invested his meager profits into basic tools: a pressure washer, a restoration kit, some workshop space in a shared industrial building that cost him only $200 a month. The other entrepreneurs in the building thought he was crazy at first, This thin man with tired eyes sorting through trash and cleaning discarded goods with the precision of a surgeon. But something remarkable happened when people actually saw what Marcus was doing. The lady who owned the vintage furniture restoration shop next to him began to notice his work. She saw how he could take a broken Victorian chair and return it to its original beauty, how he understood the bones of old furniture the way most people understand their own bodies. She started referring clients to him. A contractor building high-end residential properties began asking if Marcus could source specific reclaimed materials: barnwood, old brick, salvaged hardware. These weren't resales anymore. These were custom jobs. His prices crept upward. His reputation began to spread through the network of builders, designers, and restoration experts who frequented the industrial park. Exactly 2 years and 3 months after he'd pushed his shopping cart for the first time into the wealthy neighborhood, Marcus received an email that seemed like a scam. The subject line read, "High-end material sourcing opportunity, premium rates." The body of the email was from someone named Patricia Westbrook, Vice President of Operations for Cornerstone Development, a major commercial real estate and renovation company. She'd found his website while researching sustainable materials for a massive restoration project, a historic mill complex conversion into luxury apartments and commercial space. She wanted to know if he could source specific reclaimed materials on a consistent basis, not dozens of items, not hundreds. She was talking about thousands of square feet of reclaimed hardwood, hundreds of vintage light fixtures, specialized brick and stone, architectural elements, and other high-end salvage materials that they needed to complete the project's aesthetic vision. Marcus read the email 5 times, each time waiting for it to make sense or disappear. He called his sister, who worked in marketing and who'd always believed he was onto something even when he was essentially just collecting trash. She read him the email and confirmed it was legitimate. He looked at Sophie, who was doing her homework at the kitchen table, concentrating hard on an algebra problem that was way too difficult for her age because her tutor, paid for partially by Marcus's growing income, was pushing her to excel. He closed his eyes and allowed himself to imagine what it would mean if this Patricia Westbrook was serious. They could move to a better apartment. Sophie could have her own room again. He could stop the midnight shifts. He could actually sleep. That night, Marcus spent 6 hours researching Cornerstone Development. The company was real, substantial, and successful. Cornerstone had completed major projects in 5 states, and their portfolio included stunning before and after photographs of transformations that took his breath away. Patricia Westbrook's LinkedIn profile confirmed she was exactly who she claimed to be: a professional with 20 years of experience in commercial development. The project she'd mentioned, the Riverside Mill conversion, was already in the news. It was being funded by a major investment group and was positioned as a flagship project that would transform an entire section of downtown in the city where Marcus lived. This was real. This was happening. He spent the next week putting together a proposal that showed Cornerstone exactly what he could do. He documented his sourcing network. He showed examples of materials he'd found and restored. He broke down cost structures and timeline capabilities. He demonstrated his understanding of quality standards and historical accuracy requirements. He included testimonials from the contractors and designers he'd worked with, each one genuine, each one describing the care and precision Marcus brought to his work. When he hit send on Friday night, his hands were shaking. The response came Monday morning. Patricia Westbrook wanted to meet, not over the phone, in person. She wanted to see his workspace, understand his operation, and discuss what would need to happen to make this partnership work at scale. Marcus took a day off, one of the first days off he'd taken in months, and he cleaned his workshop with the intensity of someone preparing for an inspection by the Queen. He organized his materials by category. He created labels for everything. He set up a small meeting table with coffee and bottled water. He wore his best jeans and his only button-up shirt that didn't have stains on it. Patricia Westbrook arrived on a Thursday afternoon at 3 o'clock sharp. She was a tall woman, probably in her mid-60s, with silver hair and the bearing of someone completely comfortable in her own authority. She wore a tailored charcoal suit and arrived in a dark BMW that probably cost more than Marcus's apartment building. He watched from his workshop window as she parked, as she exited the vehicle, as she looked around the industrial park with an expression he couldn't quite read. For a moment, his confidence completely shattered. This woman ran major commercial projects across multiple states. She was probably just being nice before explaining that she'd overestimated his capabilities. She was about to laugh at the idea that a single dad collecting garbage could ever really contribute meaningfully to a project of the scale she was managing. She didn't laugh. Instead, she spent the next 3 hours moving through his workshop, asking detailed questions, examining his work, and actually listening to his answers. She asked about his sourcing strategy, his quality control processes, his timeline capabilities, and his ability to scale. She wanted to know about his network of suppliers, the people he'd developed relationships with over the past 3 years. She asked why he'd left his corporate job and seemed genuinely interested in his answer, not as judgment, but as context. At the end of those 3 hours, sitting at his small meeting table with terrible coffee that he'd made in a machine that also belonged to his salvage inventory, Patricia Westbrook made him an offer. Cornerstone Development wanted to contract with him for a pilot phase. They would provide him with a detailed list of materials they needed for the mill project, a timeline for delivery, and quality specifications. If he could meet their needs, they would move him into a full partnership status, meaning he'd be the exclusive sourcing partner for this project and potentially for future Cornerstone projects as well. The initial contract was for materials valued at approximately $250,000 over an 18-month period. As payment, he'd receive a percentage above his base cost, 10% above acquisition and restoration costs for the first phase, with potential increases if he demonstrated reliability and quality. She slid a contract across the table. It was 8 pages long, written in formal legal language that made his head spin. "I can see you're worried," Patricia said, and there was something warm in her voice, something kind. "Have your lawyer review this. Take a week if you need it. But Marcus, I want you to understand something. I've been in this business for a long time. I've learned to recognize people who actually understand their work, who care about quality, who are willing to push themselves to excellence. You're one of those people. I also recognize someone who's been dealt a rough hand and has refused to stay down. That matters to me. It matters to Cornerstone. That matters to this project." She stood up then, and she extended her hand. "Let's build something great together." The first week after Patricia Westbrook left his workshop, Marcus did exactly what she'd suggested. He hired a lawyer, a young woman named Jennifer from a small practice who specialized in small business contracts and who only charged $300 for her review, an amount he could now afford without choosing between that and eating. Jennifer examined the contract line by line and then looked at him with an expression of professional respect. "This is a legitimate, fair contract," she told him. "Cornerstone Development is a real company making a real offer. There's nothing predatory here. This is actually a generous percentage for someone at your stage. But more than that, Marcus, this is a partnership track. If you deliver on the pilot phase, this contract opens doors for you." He signed the papers that Friday, and he did it in his apartment with Sophie sitting at the kitchen table, witness to her father's signature becoming part of something potentially transformative. The materials list from Cornerstone was both overwhelming and exhilarating. They needed 675 square feet of reclaimed hardwood flooring in specific dimensions, 42 vintage industrial light fixtures that had to be authenticated and fully restored, 238 yards of salvaged brick from early 20th century buildings, brass architectural elements including railings and trim pieces, and a collection of period-appropriate doors and hardware that would maintain historical accuracy while meeting modern building codes. Each item had specifications. Each one had a timeline. The total project deadline was 9 months to complete sourcing, restoration, and delivery of all items. For someone who'd been working alone from a 200-square-foot workshop, with one purchased pressure washer and a collection of basic hand tools, this was essentially impossible. Marcus knew it was impossible. He also knew that he was going to do it anyway. The first thing he did was bring in help. He reached out to the contractors and designers he'd worked with over the past 3 years, people who'd come to trust his work and his integrity. He explained the opportunity and asked if they'd be interested in partnering with him on a larger scale. The response was better than he'd hoped. 3 of them, a carpenter named Derek who specialized in furniture restoration, an electrician named James who understood vintage wiring and lighting systems, and a woman named Keisha who ran a small architectural salvage operation, agreed to become his core team. They met at his workshop on a Sunday afternoon, sitting on crates and broken chairs, and Marcus laid out what he was proposing. "I need us to become a real company," he said simply. "Not just Marcus collecting trash and selling it. An actual sourcing and restoration operation with standards, processes, and a timeline we can commit to. I can pay you each a base rate and we'll split any profits above costs. I know it's not a traditional employment situation, but it's the best I can offer right now." Derek, James, and Keisha exchanged looks, and there was a moment of clarity in that glance. They understood they were being asked to believe in something, to take a risk on a friend, and to help build something real. They all agreed. Within 2 weeks, Marcus had expanded his workshop space, leasing an additional 1,500 square feet in the same industrial building for another $200 a month. He purchased better equipment, specialized restoration tools, a professional-grade pressure washer system, proper storage for fragile architectural elements, and a climate-controlled section for wood restoration. He set up a system for tracking inventory, for documenting restoration work, and for quality control. He created a timeline that broke down the 9-month deadline into achievable milestones. He began to source materials with a precision that bordered on obsession. Every day after Sophie's school drop-off, he was calling contacts, visiting demolition sites, coordinating with salvage yards, negotiating prices, and building relationships with suppliers who could provide consistent materials that met Cornerstone's specifications. The first month was chaos. Derek, James, and Keisha would show up and find Marcus in the middle of organizing materials, trying to figure out restoration priorities, or simply overwhelmed by the scale of what he'd committed to. But they worked together, and slowly, the chaos began to organize itself into a functioning operation. Derek took charge of all wood restoration, creating a workshop within the workshop where he could work on pieces carefully, assessing damage, planning repairs, and executing restoration with the precision of an artist. James worked on the electrical elements and vintage lighting, understanding the historical context of each piece and how to make them meet modern safety standards while preserving their original character. Keisha, with her deep connections in the architectural salvage world, became Marcus's sourcing partner, helping him find specific pieces and negotiate better prices through her network. The first quarterly check-in with Patricia Westbrook happened exactly 90 days after Marcus signed the contract. He'd delivered 75% of the materials for the first phase of the project, all of them meeting Cornerstone specifications and arriving on schedule. Patricia came to the workshop again, and this time she brought someone with her, a man named Chen, no relation, who was Cornerstone's CEO and founder. Marcus's stomach dropped. He couldn't imagine why the CEO would need to be there. In his mind, he was still the trash collector, and this must be when the actual important people would reveal that he wasn't up to the job. Chen was a completely different presence from Patricia. He was in his early 70s, with a sharp face and sharper eyes that seemed to see everything simultaneously. He wore expensive but understated clothing, a simple gray suit and a silk tie that probably cost more than Marcus's entire weekly earnings. They shook hands, and Richard's grip was firm and genuine. "Patricia's been telling me about what you're doing here," Richard said, and his voice carried the confidence of someone who'd built an empire from scratch and knew exactly what it took. "Show me your operation." For the next 2 hours, Marcus walked them through everything. He explained his sourcing methodology, his quality control processes, his team, and his system for managing the Cornerstone project alongside his smaller resale business. He showed them documented examples of restoration work, before and after photographs that demonstrated the care and skill his team brought to each piece.